what is food insecurity and who does it affect in Iowa? And Deann, let's go ahead and start with you.
Thanks, Susanna. The very short answer to this question is more people than you think. And to explain that a little more, most of us rely on the federal poverty level to give us some indication of the people who are struggling in Iowa. That's logical, right? So pre-COVID, that number was about 12%. About 12% of Iowa households live below the federal poverty level. But it's missing a whole lot of people. And here's why. To use the federal poverty level, it's important to know where it comes from. And the federal poverty level was developed in the 1960s by a federal economist named Molly Orshansky, who was charged with determining how many people in the United States lived in poverty. So her methodology was to take the average family's food budget. At that time, food was the most expensive item in a family's budget, multiply it by 3, and call it federal poverty level. That is where that number comes from. Although it's been adjusted incrementally over time for inflation, the methodology remains the same. So that's what we're relying on as our indicator. But as you think about your own budget at home, food is probably no longer the most important item or the most expensive item in your budget. For families with young children, it's childcare. For most of the rest of us, it's housing. So we need a methodology that tells us a little bit more than what we're getting from federal poverty level. In the United Way Alice report, we use a methodology that looks at a survival budget, meaning the basic things a family needs to survive: food, housing, transportation, health, and childcare. And that tells us that it's more like 37% of Iowa households who are struggling every week, every month, every year. So you can, obviously 12% is not acceptable, but 37% is really not acceptable. And it's important to know about a third of those households that are struggling or have kids in them, a third have seniors. So it's across the spectrum of age of people who are struggling. The reason that food is a leading indicator of this is because food's the most expensive or the most flexible item in your budget. Housing's set, childcare is set, insurance is set, transportation is set. Food is where families make compromises to make their budgets work. So to bring us to a real life example today, we are sitting here on July 30th. There are thousands of households in Iowa who are not eating adequately this week because they are hoping to make August rent on Saturday.
So 37% is a very alarming statistic, Deann. Linda, you are on the front lines at food banks. From your perspective, what is food insecurity and who does it affect in Iowa?
Well, I have to follow up with the information that Deann has shared is very, very telling, I think, for all of us. And the fact that food insecurity is found in every county across Iowa. So in every area, from the west to the east, south and north. And it means that Iowans don't have enough food to live an active, healthy lifestyle. And when you're looking at that food insecurity, it's over 340,000 people. With the pandemic, it's increased substantially. We could talk about that a little bit more later on, but having a lack of food affects working families, seniors, children, and it also affects the state as a whole. It affects our healthcare costs. The lack of good food to eat is also is a key component on a daily healthy lifestyle. When Deann had mentioned in the fact that food is our first flag, we have to eat 3 times a day. That's one thing that we all have in common. We drink water, we must have water, and we must eat. And it's a basic necessity of life, and it's the first flag of indication. If people are having difficulty getting food, they have additional things going on in their household, most likely. And so we see a lot of people in need in Iowa, and the pandemic has put a spotlight on it. It has been a part of a problem across the state, but I think we're all coming together, and throughout this series, I think we'll learn a lot of wonderful things that are happening.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Linda. Dr. Johnson, what is food insecurity and who does it affect in Iowa?
I'd really echo what Deann and Linda shared as well. To add to that, for our special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, commonly known as the WIC program, we not only define food insecurity as having a lack of access to food, but also by the fact that people have a lack of access to nutritious food items. So it's the type of food availability for individuals that's also important in that definition of food insecurity. And again, just echoing what Deann and Linda shared, when we look at our data, we see that food insecurity is affecting community members across the state, across a host of demographics. So this is something that's touching every part of Iowa.
So I'm hearing not enough of the right kind of foods, and affecting probably more people than we know. Secretary Naig, from the perspective of the Department of Agriculture, we live in an agricultural state. What is food insecurity and how does it affect Iowa?
Right. Well, and Susanna, thanks again for inviting me to join this. And I think the topic of hunger so close to home, as you set this up and you say, here I am on the, typically thinking about being on the production side of the food equation here, of the supply chain. I think one of the things that's been difficult for folks to get their heads around, and especially in the last couple of months, is here we sit in one of the most productive states in the nation. We're number 2 to California only in the size and scale and the value of the food and agriculture products that we produce here in the state of Iowa. Not too bad considering the land mass and the number of people that we have in this state. And then to think, though, that food insecurity affects Iowans of all walks of life all across the state. Deann, I thought you hit that right on the head, which is more than you think is the right answer, I think, and one of the key answers to this. We think in Iowa a lot about solving hunger issues around the world in other places. We have famous hunger fighters like Dr. Norman Borlaug and Herbert Hoover and on and on. We think about exporting our food and agriculture and helping to solve hunger issues around the world. And those are real as well, and an important role that we play in the world. But to then shift our thinking a bit and think about right here at home, what can be done? What can we do? And we'll talk a little bit about this, some of the efforts over the last couple of months to try to connect that great production, in fact, surplus on farms, with food insecure Iowans. And there's been a lot of effort, a lot of great partners that have come together to work. And so I think it's just generally trying to shift that thinking. And I really appreciate this series and this effort over the next year to think about how Iowa stops hunger, how we address hunger so close to home. And so I'm gonna add my support to the more than you think. And I'd also like to remind folks, hunger occurs all across the states, urban areas, rural areas, and that's something we must keep in mind. Because I was in one of our less populated states earlier this week talking about this very issue with food pantries, and the challenge is real, challenge is great, and we just need to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you, appreciate it. And Dr. Nelson, from your vantage point, what is food insecurity and who does it affect in Iowa?
I'd like to build on one of the points that Nalo spoke of, and I think we have to very carefully dissect food insecurity into 2 categories, and that is, are we food insecure nutritionally, food insecure calorically, or is it a combination of both? And I would maintain that when we actually look at those 2 evidences, there's actually 2 almost separate groups of folks that fall into that type of insecurity, and probably need very different approaches to how we address the problem. The other thing I would note is Kemin, as a global company, I have the opportunity to travel worldwide, and you're in India, which has nearly 80 million children who are stunted, it's very obvious when you're traveling or in a village such as I've been in that you can see very clearly malnutrition very evident. In Iowa, I will maintain it's mostly invisible. We do not have what I would call extraordinarily seriously malnourished individuals, but we have people who are seriously food compromised, both nutritionally especially, and in some cases calorically. So those things need to be realized as we begin this whole discussion on food insecurity here close at home.